He wrote it long before you were born, but somehow every line feels like it's speaking directly to you. What if the warnings weren't for his generation, but for yours? He was just a boy, no one special, not a prince, not a warrior, not a man born into the splendor of kingship or the shadows of prophecy. Just a boy walking the streets of Jerusalem when the world was cracking open around him. The smoke of incense filled the temple. The priests chanted. But Isaiah, he heard something else. It happened in the year King Uzziah died. That detail mattered, because when one era ends, something ancient often slips through the cracks. Isaiah said he saw the Lord, high and lifted up, seated on a throne that stretched beyond the sky. His robe filled the temple. His presence filled the air like thunder hiding behind silence. And above him creatures with 6 wings and burning eyes cried out, "Holy, holy, holy." The boy fell. He wasn't supposed to see this. No one was. He said, "Woe is me. I am undone. I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips." His confession wasn't just personal, it was national. The filth of the world was caked into every word they spoke. Then one of the burning ones flew to the altar. It held a coal so hot it hissed even in heavenly fire. It touched Isaiah's mouth, not to burn but to clean. The angel said, "Your guilt is taken away. Your sin is atoned for." The fire purified the message and the messenger alike. And then came the voice. It did not sound like thunder. It was worse than thunder. It asked, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" And Isaiah, trembling in the ashes of what used to be his identity, whispered the words that would define his life and echo through centuries. "Here I am. Send me." He did not know what he was agreeing to. He did not know that the words he would speak would be ignored, mocked, and twisted. He did not know that he would see cities crumble, empires rise, children led into exile, and friends dragged into chains. He did not know that his words would not be understood for thousands of years, but they would never be forgotten. Isaiah's calling was not a reward. It was a burden. It was not a privilege. It was a wound that never closed. But through that wound, light poured in. And through that boy, history would be haunted forever by a voice it tried to forget. The streets of Jerusalem still echoed with music and laughter. But the soul of the kingdom was rotting. Judah wore a mask of strength, but behind the stone walls and temple hymns, fear had crept in like a slow poison. The 8th century before Christ was supposed to be a time of peace, but peace bought with compromise is never peace at all. The kings had grown cautious, then cowardly. Deals were made in secret chambers. Gold was sent to Assyria in trembling hands, hoping bribes would buy survival. The prophets shouted, "Do not trust in chariots, do not lean on foreign swords." But no one listened. Power had become the only prayer they still believed in. Morally, the people stumbled in daylight. The poor were trampled in the marketplaces. Judges accepted silver to twist justice. Widows starved while the elite dined under carved ivory ceilings. Songs of worship still rose from the temple, but the hands lifted in praise were stained with blood. Sacrifices burned on altars, but they were empty gestures, hollow rituals for a God they no longer feared. And the idols returned. Quietly at first, small statues hidden in homes. Then louder. Hills once sacred to the Lord now held carved poles and foreign gods. Children were led by trembling hands into fire, sacrificed to false powers in the name of prosperity. And still the people said, "We are safe. We are the chosen. We are God's people." But Isaiah saw beneath the surface. He saw the cracks widening. The kingdom was like a vineyard gone wild brambles where grapes should grow, thorns choking out the fruit. He saw the winepress of justice overturned, its sweetness soured into wrath. Judah was not standing strong. It was leaning on a crumbling wall, and every breath of wind made it sway. What terrified Isaiah most wasn't just the enemies at the gates. It was the silence inside the hearts of the people. They no longer wept when they sinned. They no longer trembled when they lied. Their conscience was a burnt field, nothing left to grow, nothing left to burn. The kingdom was on the brink, but they didn't see it, or worse, they saw, and they no longer cared. And when the voice of the prophet rang through the alleys and temple courts, it wasn't received as mercy. It was heard as noise, as insult, as threat. But judgment doesn't always begin with fire from the sky. Sometimes it begins with a whisper, a turning away, a window that closes. And when Judah turned its face from God, Isaiah knew it wasn't just a nation in danger. It was the future. Time did not pass normally in that moment. It bent, it buckled, it shattered like glass under a silent scream. Isaiah was no longer in the temple, and yet he was. He was no longer just a man. He was a soul peeled open, stripped bare before a throne that should not have been seen. It was not a dream. It was not a metaphor. It was a collision between flesh and the infinite. He saw the Lord, not the idea of God, not a voice in the wind, not a vision in the clouds. He saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple like a storm fills the sea. There were no shadows because he was the light. There were no edges because he had no boundaries. Isaiah did not describe his face. He could not. Some things are too holy for memory, too terrible for words. Around him were the burning ones, seraphim, not gentle angels. These were beings wrapped in fire, each with 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces. With 2 they covered their feet. With 2 they flew. And they cried out not with calm hymns, but with voices that shook the foundations of creation. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The doors of the temple trembled. The smoke filled every corner. But the fire didn't destroy. Not yet. It revealed. It tore down the illusion of safety. And in that moment, Isaiah saw not just the throne but what the throne demanded. He cried out, "Woe is me, I am undone." Not because he had sinned more than others, but because he had seen what others refused to see. He saw holiness not as comfort, but as fire. Not as permission, but as judgment. He saw the line between heaven and earth break, and nothing on earth could remain unchanged. That vision was not trapped in the past. It reached forward. It echoed. It refused to die. Because what Isaiah saw was not just for Judah. It was for every age that would pretend God was small enough to tame. Every nation that would mistake silence for absence. Every people that would dress sin in ceremony and call it righteousness. The vision shattered time because it came from outside of time, and once it enters a human soul, it never leaves. It burns, it warns, and it waits for those willing to see it again. He didn't blame the world first. He blamed himself. That was the difference. Isaiah didn't point at the wicked kings or the corrupt priests or the idol-choked hills. When heaven opened and fire filled his eyes, the first thing he said was this: "Woe is me, for I am undone. I am a man of unclean lips, not unclean hands, not unclean thoughts, lips." Because Isaiah knew something most of us forget, that words reveal what the heart tries to hide, that what slips from the tongue often exposes what festers in the soul. His lips had spoken holy things, prayers, blessings, maybe even prophecies before this moment. But now he saw the difference between human words and the voice that shook the pillars of heaven. He saw the contrast between what he thought was holy and what truly was, and in that moment, even his best seemed tainted. The coal had to touch his mouth, not just to cleanse, but to burn away the illusion of purity. And he didn't stop with himself. "I dwell among a people of unclean lips." It wasn't just about individual guilt. It was a culture, a language, a world wrapped in lies and flattery and half-truths and holy-sounding poison. Words were the disease. Songs of worship sung by voices that also cursed. prayers lifted by mouths that mocked the poor, prophecies twisted to serve kings instead of truth. Isaiah stood there, broken, not because he had murdered or stolen, but because he had spoken, and the fire showed him what those words really were. That confession still speaks, because the sickness hasn't changed. We live in a world where language has become camouflage, where truth is dressed in sarcasm, and love is diluted with conditions, where people speak peace but sharpen their sentences like knives, where lips bless and curse with the same breath. And we call it normal. But Isaiah shows us what happens when normal is exposed to the holy. It melts, it collapses, and all the clever justifications fall silent. Unclean lips point to an unclean world, not just in ancient Judah, not just in palace halls and temple courts, but here, now. Everywhere voices echo without weight. Everywhere praise is performance. Everywhere words are currency spent on vanity, not truth. Isaiah's confession wasn't just about him. It was about us. Because until someone says, "Woe is me," the world keeps pretending nothing's wrong. And until the cold touches our mouths, we keep speaking as if we understand, but we don't. Not yet. They weren't sweet-faced angels. They weren't floating harpists in white robes. They were fire, living fire, seraphim, the burning ones. Isaiah didn't say how many there were. Maybe because the number didn't matter. Or maybe because counting was impossible when your soul is being unraveled. Each had 6 wings, not for flight alone, but for reverence. With 2, they covered their faces because even they could not look fully upon the glory that sat on the throne. With 2, they covered their feet because even they felt the shame of standing in his presence. And with 2, they flew not to rise above, but to serve without touching down. They cried out, not softly, not in lullabies, but with voices that shook the temple's foundation like thunder pounding from within the bones of the earth. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. They did not speak of love. They did not speak of peace. The first thing heaven says about God is holiness, not safe, not familiar, not manageable. Holy. 3 times they said it. Holy, holy, holy. Not for rhythm, for emphasis, for infinity wrapped in sound. Because holiness is not one thing, it is everything that is not us. It is light that burns but does not destroy. It is perfection that terrifies. It is beauty so pure it wounds. Isaiah never forgot those voices. No prophet ever did, because the seraphim were not there for show. They were a warning, a reminder that even heaven burns with fear and wonder before the throne, that even the highest beings tremble in praise. But they were also more than symbols. They were messengers. One of them took the coal from the altar where judgment burned, and placed it on Isaiah's lips, not to destroy him, but to prepare him. Because no one speaks for God until they've been burned by him first. No one carries his words until their own have been silenced. The seraphim still speak, not in words we hear, but in the unease that stirs when we draw too close to what is truly holy. They are the fire that whispers in the spine during a moment too sacred for comfort. They are the presence behind the veil that reminds us we were made to bow. They are not there to flatter. They are not there to soothe. They are there to guard the line between the infinite and the dust. And when that line breaks, when the veil is torn, they cry out again, not in warning, but in worship. Because to them, holiness is not a threat. It is the only truth worth shouting forever. It wasn't a command. It was a question. A voice from the throne that had just shattered reality asked, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" The fire still hung in the air. Smoke still curled in Isaiah's lungs. His lips had only just been seared by the coal. He could have stayed silent. He could have turned away. But instead, he stepped forward, trembling, ash still clinging to his soul. And he said the words that would wreck his life and rewrite history. "Here I am. Send me." He didn't ask for details. He didn't bargain for protection. He didn't ask what the people would say or whether they would listen, because deep down, he already knew. He was not being sent to a people hungry for truth. He was being sent to the deaf, to the proud, to the blind who chose blindness. But something in him still answered yes, because when you see the throne, when you hear that voice, there's no halfway anymore. You either run or you burn. And Isaiah chose the fire. But what came next was not a celebration. It was a warning. God said, "Go and tell this people, keep on hearing but do not understand. Keep on seeing but do not perceive." It wasn't just a mission, it was a sentence. Isaiah would speak, and they would not listen. He would warn, and they would laugh. He would cry out in the streets, and they would shut their doors. His voice would ring out like thunder in a drought, and still the ground would crack. "Make their hearts dull," God said. "Make their ears heavy. Shut their eyes, not to curse them, but to expose them. Because sometimes truth is not given to enlighten, it's given to judge. And when a people choose darkness over and over again, the light itself becomes unbearable." Isaiah asked, "How long, Lord?" And the answer came like a falling blade. "Until cities lie in ruins, until the land is empty, until everything is desolate." This was the mission. Not to be loved, not to be praised, but to speak the truth until the last echo faded. He could have refused, but he didn't. He knew what it would cost: isolation, rejection, grief without relief. And still he stood, not because he was strong, but because he had seen something stronger. And once you see the throne, once you taste the fire, there is no going back. Isaiah didn't become a prophet because it was glorious. He became a prophet because no one else would say what needed to be said. So he whispered it into a world that would not listen. "Here I am. Send me." And heaven did. It sounded cruel at first. "Speak," God said, "but know this, they won't hear you. Show them, but know this, they will never see. Call out, cry out, wear out your voice like the soles of your feet, and know it will fall like rain on stone." Isaiah asked, "How long, Lord?" And the answer was not until they repent, not until they awaken, but until the cities lie in waste, until everything breaks. This wasn't punishment alone. It was exposure. Because sometimes the hardest judgment is simply this: God lets people keep what they've chosen. And Judah had chosen deafness, not with their ears, but with their hearts. They had heard the prophets before. They had seen the signs, and they had hardened themselves, slowly and with full intent, until the truth could no longer reach them. So God told Isaiah, "Make the heart of this people dull. Close their ears, shut their eyes," not because he wanted them blind, but because their blindness had become willful. They wore it like armor. And now, he would let it harden. The message would come like lightning, but they would cover their eyes and call it coincidence. The warnings would shake the earth, but they would call it weather. Their pride would eat the last crumbs of mercy, and still they would not turn. Isaiah was sent not to change them, but to reveal them. His voice was a mirror. His words were light, not to warm, but to expose. And in that light, every crack in the soul showed. Every lie disguised as tradition. Every ritual that masked rebellion. Every hymn that tried to drown out the groaning of the poor. All of it burned under the voice of the prophet. This is the terror of free will. That God will not always shout over your silence. That he may one day stop whispering altogether. That the truth, spoken over and over, begins to become judgment simply because you refuse to hear it, again and again and again. Isaiah knew they would mock him, that his words would fall to the ground, unopened, unread, unwelcomed, but he still spoke. Because even if they would not hear, the words still mattered. They were not wasted. They were recorded, sealed, saved for a generation not yet born, for ears that would tremble, for eyes that would finally open. So he spoke to the deaf. He painted visions for the blind. Because the truth never dies. It only waits. And one day, when the noise fades and the pride cracks, someone will find those words again and weep because they finally understand. Isaiah did not only speak to the streets. He walked into palaces. He looked kings in the eye and told them what they didn't want to hear. And few kings were as dangerous as Ahaz. He wore the crown of Judah, but his loyalty belonged elsewhere, bought by foreign gold and bent before foreign gods. Isaiah wasn't just confronting a man. He was stepping into an invisible war that had already begun to consume the soul of a nation. Ahaz ruled with fear disguised as strategy. The armies of the north threatened war. So Ahaz did what cowards often do. He reached for help in the wrong direction. He sent messengers to Assyria, begging the empire to come and crush his enemies. But when you invite a monster to your table, you don't get peace. You get devoured last, Isaiah warned him. He stood before the trembling king and spoke of a sign from heaven, not just for the moment, but for all time. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son, he said, and shall call his name Emmanuel, God with us. It was a message layered in time, spoken into the crisis of that century, but echoing into a future not even Isaiah could fully grasp. But Ahaz didn't want signs. He wanted alliances. He wanted safety he could hold in his hands, not promises that required trust. And so he bowed to Assyria, cut deals in darkness, and filled Judah with idols he imported from his new masters. The king who should have led the people to God led them deeper into exile while still sitting on the throne. Isaiah saw what others didn't, that this was not just political maneuvering, it was spiritual treason. Powers beyond flesh were moving. Kingdoms of men were being manipulated by forces unseen. And when Isaiah spoke, he wasn't just defying kings, he was declaring war on the spirits that whispered behind their thrones. Every nation has its altars. Every ruler listens to something. And when the voice of God is rejected, another voice takes its place. One darker, one older, one more than willing to offer power in exchange for silence. Isaiah didn't just see kings falling. He saw shadows rising behind them. This is why prophets are feared. Not because they speak of droughts or armies, but because they pull back the veil. They name the spirit behind the lie. They point to the wound hidden behind the gold. And that truth shakes thrones far more than swords ever could. Isaiah stood in the fire of that truth. Alone, hated, feared, but unmoved, because he knew the real war was never between nations. It was between voices, between light and shadow. And in that war, one man with a burning word could silence kings. Sometimes, the message wasn't written in scrolls. Sometimes, it cried in the night and clung to its mother's robe. Isaiah's children were not just sons. They were signs, flesh and blood prophecy, living symbols walking through a nation that refused to listen. And every time their names were called aloud in the streets, it was heaven speaking through syllables that no one could ignore. The first was Shear Jashub. His name meant a remnant shall return. It sounded like hope, but it was laced with sorrow. Because a remnant means not everyone survives. A remnant means fire comes first. It was a promise that after the judgment, something small would remain, but only a few. Only the ones who still remembered the voice of the Lord when everything else had fallen silent. Then came the second son, Maher-shalal-hash-baz, the name that thundered like a warning. It meant quick to plunder, swift to spoil. It was the sound of war on the wind. The name itself was prophecy, a sentence etched across a child's life before he could speak. Isaiah wrote it down on a scroll and had it witnessed before the boy was born, because once the name was spoken, judgment was already marching. Assyria was coming, not in decades, in days. Every time a neighbor called for the child, every time the name echoed in the marketplace or outside the gates, it was a reminder: destruction is not sleeping, It is moving fast. But these were not just messages for Isaiah's time. They were shadows stretching forward. Because there would come another child, one born not with a warning, but with a name that shattered despair. Emmanuel, God with us. Not just a concept, a presence, a promise, wrapped in fragile skin, yet holding eternal weight. Isaiah's sons were warnings, but this child would be salvation. He would not come to announce judgment, but to carry it. Not to name the fire, but to walk through it for us. The child with two names is every child God ever used to speak into the world. Fragile, small, yet carrying something vast. The names given by heaven were not just for them, they were for the world watching, the world forgetting, the world waiting for signs in a language it could no longer understand. Isaiah's children were not accidents of birth. They were symbols etched into history. A remnant shall return. Destruction comes quickly. God is with us. Each name a note in a song only a few would ever learn to sing. Each name a step in the story that still unfolds today. The streets buzzed with whispers. Behind every door, someone was sure they knew the real reason for the famine. The fear, the silence in the palace halls. They blamed foreign spies, secret pacts, hidden traitors. They said prophets were bought, priests were compromised, and that nothing was as it seemed. But Isaiah stood in the center of it all and declared something no one wanted to hear. Do not call conspiracy everything these people call conspiracy. Because the real danger wasn't hiding in a back room, it was standing in plain sight. The fear itself had become the weapon. Judah was cracking under pressure. Armies gathered at the borders. Kings lied to one another with golden smiles. The temple still stood, but the heart of the nation had already begun to rot. And in the confusion, people looked for explanations, anything but the truth. They blamed each other. They blamed foreign enemies. They even blamed the prophets, but they would not blame their own rebellion. Isaiah saw through it. He knew the plots were not the problem. The problem was that no one feared the Lord anymore. They feared loss. They feared invasion. They feared change, but not God. And so fear became its own God, whispering in the shadows, feeding off suspicion, growing stronger every time truth was ignored in favor of scandal. Isaiah was not naive. He knew there were schemes. He knew kings met in secret and sold their souls for alliances. But those were symptoms. The real sickness was deeper. The people had traded trust for terror. They no longer listened to the voice of the Lord. They listened to each other. And the echo chamber of fear turned their hearts to stone. So the prophet drew a line. Fear not what they fear, he said. Do not dread it. Let the Lord be your fear. Let him be your dread, because once you fear God rightly, every other fear shrinks to its true size. The conspiracy was not in the courts. It was in the hearts of a people who refused to repent. And the more they blamed shadows, the less they noticed the fire already licking at their doorposts. This is what Isaiah knew. Fear is contagious, but so is faith. And when a nation chooses fear, it will invent any story to avoid facing the truth. But the truth stands, even when no one wants to hear it. Especially then. Isaiah didn't argue with the rumors. He didn't try to outshout the panic. He just kept speaking what God gave him. And in the end, it wasn't the hidden plots that doomed them. It was the open rejection of the only one who could save them. The conspiracy they feared never was. The judgment they ignored was already here. The prophecy came in a time of terror. Armies were closing in, and King Ahaz stood shaking not from the cold, but from the weight of a war he could not win. Isaiah came to him with a message from heaven. Ask for a sign, the Lord said. Anything, as high as the heavens or as deep as the grave. But Ahaz, pretending to be pious, refused, not because he feared God, but because he feared letting go of his own plans. So God gave a sign anyway. "A virgin shall conceive and bear a son," Isaiah said, "and shall call his name Emmanuel," God with us. It was a promise layered in time. On the surface, it pointed to a child soon to be born, perhaps Isaiah's own son, or one within the royal line. Someone whose birth would mark the collapse of Judah's enemies and the survival of the kingdom for now. But the words burned too deeply to be about only that moment. They echoed far beyond the court of Ahaz. They stretched into a future where a virgin would conceive not by man, but by miracle. Where the child born would not just symbolize God with us, but be God with us. Flesh wrapped around divinity, the infinite stepped into time. Isaiah may not have seen the full distance of what he spoke, but the spirit that burned on his lips carried more than one meaning. This is how prophecy moves, like a mountain range seen from afar. First the hills of the near future, then the towering peaks of something far greater beyond. The sign of Emmanuel was more than a comfort for a panicked king. It was a declaration of war against fear itself, a promise that God would not stay distant, watching from the heavens, but would walk the dust with us, would bleed, would breathe, would be born into the very world he once spoke into being. And yet, in Isaiah's day, most still missed it. They heard the words, they watched the child, but they did not see the shadow that stretched forward through the centuries, growing clearer with every step toward Bethlehem. Prophecy is not a puzzle for scholars, it's a mirror. It reflects the fears of today and the hope of forever, all in one image. The child in Isaiah's time was a sign of temporary deliverance, but the child to come would be the sign of eternal redemption, Emmanuel. God with us, not just for one king, not just for one war, but for all of us forever. Even now, the name still speaks, the sign still stands, and the question remains: will we see only the surface, or dare to believe the greater meaning hidden beneath? The name sounded like hope. Emmanuel, God with us. It echoed through the halls of power like a promise wrapped in light. But Isaiah's voice carried more than comfort. His tone was not soft. It was shaking with fire. Because the truth behind that name is far more dangerous than it seems. God with us. That phrase can save you or destroy you, because it all depends on one thing: which side you're on when he arrives. In Isaiah's day, the people assumed God was with them by default. They had the temple, they had the scrolls, they had the festivals and the rituals. They sang the right songs and offered the right sacrifices. But their hearts were far away. They worshipped idols in secret. They oppressed the poor. They trusted in alliances with empires more than they trusted in the Lord. And still they said, "God is with us." But Isaiah shattered that illusion. Emmanuel was not just a comfort. He was a threat, a line drawn in fire. Because if God is with us, then who can stand against us? But if God is against us, then who can stand at all? The prophecy came during a political storm, armies rising, kings plotting, the nation trembling on the edge of ruin. And into that chaos, Isaiah did not offer reassurance. He offered clarity. The child to be born, Emmanuel, was a sign. But signs are not always soft. Sometimes they are warnings. Roadblocks before a cliff. He will eat curds and honey, Isaiah said, because the land will be stripped bare. Before the child even knows right from wrong, the land of your enemies will be abandoned. It sounded like victory. But Isaiah's next words cut deeper. The Lord will bring upon you days unlike any since the house of David split in two. Judgment was coming. And the name Emmanuel didn't cancel it. It confirmed it, because God was with them. But not in the way they hoped. The presence of God is not always a shield. Sometimes it is a sword. And when a people cry, "God is with us," while living in rebellion, what they are really summoning is fire. Emmanuel does not mean we are safe. It means he is near. And when he is near, nothing stays hidden. Isaiah understood the weight of that name. It is not to be worn lightly. It is not a charm. It is not a slogan for banners and politics. It is a mirror held up to the soul. So ask yourself, when God comes close, is it to deliver you or to confront you? Emmanuel, God with us, the most comforting and most terrifying name ever spoken. Before light ever breaks, there is always a moment when the night feels endless. Isaiah stood in that hour, speaking into a darkness so thick it choked the breath. The people walked with heads bowed, eyes dulled, hearts numb. They had heard the prophecies. They had shrugged off the warnings. And now, the silence between them and heaven had begun to roar. Isaiah did not flinch. He spoke of anguish and shadow, of a land that would look for answers in the wrong places, mediums, dead voices, and the echo chambers of their own fear. He saw what was coming, and he named it despair. Thick, cold, crawling into every home like smoke. But the prophet also knew that judgment was not the end. Not if you looked closely, because buried inside every warning was a flicker, a spark, a promise that would not die. There will be no more gloom for those who were in distress. Isaiah saw beyond the black horizon. He named the very places most crushed by war, Zebulun, Naphtali, and said from there, the light would rise. The regions humiliated first would be honored last. It was a reversal no one could predict, a mercy no one could earn. The people who walked in darkness would see a great light, but the light doesn't skip the darkness. It breaks it. And to do that, it must step directly into it. That's why Isaiah spoke of a child. Again, a child. Not an army, not a king born in armor, but a baby born in vulnerability. Because sometimes God defeats darkness not with force, but with presence. Not with thunder, but with breath. He would be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Not someday, not in metaphor, but in flesh. Real, close, Emmanuel again. Isaiah never denied the coming despair. He stared straight into it. He saw the people reaching for the dead, worshipping what cannot speak, choosing shadows over truth. But he also saw the dawn, and he dared to say it aloud when no one else believed it would come. This is the rhythm of prophecy. First the night, then the cry, then the light. Isaiah's words still echo because they were never just about his century. They were carved into time itself. Every generation walks through some version of that darkness. Every generation forgets where to look, but the promise never changes. The people walking in darkness will see. Not maybe, not if, they will. Because the light is not a theory, it is a person. And even in the deepest night, he is already moving, quiet, steady, closer than we think. There was a path no one wanted to walk, a region so trampled by invaders and sorrow that its very name became a warning. Isaiah called it the land of the shadow of death. It was not poetry, it was prophecy, a place soaked in history, yet reaching for something deeper, something still on the horizon. Zebulun, Naphtali, northern tribes crushed beneath the boots of Assyria. When Isaiah spoke of gloom and anguish, he meant these places, the first to fall, the first to bleed. When the empire came roaring down like a flood, it drowned these lands in terror. Families torn, altars smashed, language and identity pulled up like weeds. It was here that the shadow thickened, but Isaiah said the unthinkable. This place of shame would one day blaze with light. The very soil soaked in judgment would become the birthplace of hope. It was not just restoration, it was reversal. God would choose the lowest point to reveal the highest glory. It began in the 8th century before the Christ. But the words would stretch far beyond it. Centuries later, when another empire ruled and the people once again walked in darkness, that same land saw something new. A man stepped into Galilee where Zebulun and Naphtali once stood broken and began to speak light. He healed, he taught, He called fishermen to follow him, and those who knew the scrolls realized Isaiah's words had been waiting. The shadow of death still hung heavy, but now the light had taken shape. Isaiah's prophecy wasn't just about Assyria. It was layered, like stained glass catching the sun from different angles. It spoke to a past judgment, but it also pointed to a future breakthrough, a time when despair would not have the final word. A dawn would come, not from Jerusalem's polished heights, but from the battered north, the land of the shadow of death. The phrase itself haunts, because it still fits places today. Streets where bullets fall like rain, homes where silence hides grief, nations numbed by injustice, people broken under the weight of loss, addiction, betrayal. We all know some corner of that land, some shadow we don't speak aloud, but Isaiah saw more than the shadow. He saw what came next. The people who walked there, who sat in the grief, who waited through the long night, they were the ones who would see the light first. Not the proud, not the powerful, but the broken places, the forgotten names, the old wounds. The land of the shadow of death is not the end. It is the stage, and the curtain is already rising, because the light does not wait for perfect ground. It chooses scarred soil and begins to shine. They walked with heads bowed, not just from defeat, but from despair. The people who walked in darkness were not a metaphor. They were real. Mothers who buried sons, fathers who lost homes, children who cried in languages the empire never bothered to learn. Assyria did not just conquer land, it crushed the spirit, and Isaiah saw it all coming. He named the places: Zebulun, Naphtali, Galilee of the nations. He watched the torchlight of foreign armies stretch across the hills and knew what it meant. The darkness was not just the absence of sunlight. It was the presence of terror, of hopelessness, of judgment. But Isaiah did something strange. He spoke in the past tense. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light, as if it had already happened, as if the light was just as certain as the shadow. And in that line, time bent, because Isaiah's words did come true, once when Assyria fell. Then again, centuries later, when a carpenter's son began to walk the same ground where soldiers once trampled freedom. That light did not arrive in thunder. It came in whispers, in parables, in touch. The darkness trembled, but prophecy never ends at one fulfillment. It keeps breathing. It moves through history like a pulse, waiting to rise again. And now, once more, we find ourselves in the land of shadows. Today, the empires look different. They do not wear iron helmets. They wear suits, speak in stock markets, code in digital silence. But the effect is the same. The weak are trampled. Truth is bought and sold. Light feels like something we remember, not something we see. We are the people walking in darkness, and Isaiah's words wait again, because the prophecy is not just about the past. It is not even just about a single birth or a single war. It is a pattern. It is the rhythm of rescue. First the night, then the light, over and over again. But here's the warning. Light comes to those who know they are in the dark. It does not flatter. It exposes. It does not negotiate. It transforms. And when the light comes, we have a choice: turn our face to it, or hide behind the shadows we've made for ourselves. Isaiah saw what we keep forgetting. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. That is the truth. The only question left is this: when it shines again, will we still be looking the other way? The words were simple, almost gentle. Unto us a child is born. Unto us a son is given. But they struck the ancient world like thunder from a clear sky. Isaiah did not shout them in triumph. He whispered them into a time of chaos, a kingdom unraveling, a people stumbling, a throne trembling under the weight of fear. And into that darkness came this promise of a child. But who was this child? Some said it was a king. Maybe Hezekiah. Maybe another in David's line, a hope that someone from the royal bloodline would finally bring justice, finally break the rod of the oppressor, finally rebuild what war had shattered. It was comforting, predictable, safe. But Isaiah's words didn't stay within the borders of a single reign. They stretched too far. They burned too bright. And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Not just royal, divine. This was no ordinary monarch. This was something the world had never seen. A child born and yet a son given. A being somehow both infant and infinite, fragile and eternal. Born into dust, yet bearing names no man could carry without breaking. Wonderful Counselor, he would speak not only with wisdom, but with wonder, piercing the fog of every human mind. Mighty God, he would hold divine authority in human hands, the Creator breathing through created lungs. Everlasting Father, he would not pass like mortal kings, but remain always near, always reaching. Prince of Peace, he would end wars not by sword but by presence, not by rule but by redemption. Isaiah stood in a world that bowed to power, feared empires, and measured time by kings, and yet he dared to say that the true future would begin with a child, not a policy, not an alliance, not a treaty, a child. The prophecy broke all boundaries. For centuries, it lay there on scrolls, in synagogues, in silence, until, under the rule of yet another empire, a star rose over Bethlehem, and people began to whisper again. Could it be? Could this child be the one? But prophecy is dangerous. It demands more than belief. It calls for surrender, not to an idea but to a person, one who was born unto us but never belonged to us. Isaiah knew what he was doing. He wasn't just describing a figure. He was drawing a line, a dividing line through all of history. Before this child, and after, unto us a child is born. It sounds so peaceful, but it is the most radical claim ever spoken. Because if it's true, then nothing is safe, and nothing will ever be the same. They are words we rush past, names we've heard in songs, etched on Christmas cards, whispered in candlelight. But Isaiah didn't speak them as decoration, he spoke them as detonations. Each name was a paradox, each title an invitation and a warning wrapped together. Everlasting Father, spoken about a child, that alone should stop us. How can one just born be ancient? How can a son also be a father? Isaiah's language wasn't sloppy, it was surgical. This child would not simply lead, he would be the source, the author, the one from whom all things flow and return. And yet, he would not dominate like earthly rulers. His fatherhood would not be cold or distant. He would not abandon, not withdraw. He would carry, cradle, correct, and remain, always. But that constancy comes with a cost. An everlasting Father does not adjust to us, we adjust to him. And for a world obsessed with reinvention, that truth cuts deep. Then comes the next name, Prince of Peace. It sounds soft, peaceful. But Isaiah's peace is not passive. It is not the peace of silence or surrender. It is not the peace you get when the stronger party crushes the weaker. This is shalom, wholeness, the mending of what was torn, the healing of what was broken. But for peace to come, the lie must die, the false kings must fall, the walls built on fear must crack open. That kind of peace always comes after a shaking. Isaiah's Prince of Peace wears a crown that was never voted on. He walks into war zones with no army and still wins. But here's the mystery. His strategy is not conquest, it's incarnation. He does not rise up. He comes down, not to dominate, but to dwell. He doesn't sign treaties. He is the treaty. Every name Isaiah gave that child breaks something in us. Breaks our small definitions of leadership, breaks our timelines, breaks our illusion that we can fix the world with better politics or bigger weapons. Wonderful Counselor, he sees what we cannot see. Mighty God, he does what we cannot do. Everlasting Father, he holds what we cannot carry. Prince of Peace, he heals what we thought was beyond saving. Isaiah wasn't just describing someone. He was drawing a profile of the only answer that would ever work. And the question Isaiah leaves hanging in the air is this: if these are his names, what does that make us? The names are not just titles. They are choices. We either bow to them or stumble over them. But either way, they stand forever. They thought they were unstoppable. Iron chariots, war horses foaming at the mouth. Cities turned to rubble. Assyria marched like a thunderstorm, relentless, merciless, loud. And Isaiah did not flinch. He did not flatter their pride. He revealed the truth. They were not the masters. They were the rod in someone else's hand. Woe to Assyria, he said. The rod of my anger. It was a terrifying thought. That God himself would use a brutal empire as his instrument. That the violence of men could become the scalpel of heaven. That the cries of the oppressed were not ignored but allowed, for a purpose deeper than anyone wanted to face. Assyria didn't know. They thought it was all their own strength, their strategies, their gods, their kings. But Isaiah pulled back the curtain. They were being used, not honored, not blessed. Used, like an axe in the hand of a woodsman. And when the cutting was done, even the axe would be judged, because divine wrath is not blind rage. It is justice too long delayed. It is holiness that will not stay silent. And when Assyria came crashing through the walls of the guilty, they were not merely a nation expanding, they were a shadow of judgment cast long before they were even born. But here's what Isaiah also saw: this wasn't just about Assyria. It never was. He was painting in layers. First, the historical. A real army, a real invasion, a real reckoning for Judah's pride and idolatry. Then, the cosmic. A warning about how God deals with arrogance, how even the powerful become pawns when they lift themselves above the throne of heaven. And finally, the future. A vision of judgment still to come. A time when another rod would rise, maybe not with spears and fire, but with systems, with lies, with control so deep it doesn't look like conquest, it looks like progress. But Isaiah had already named the pattern. The rod of God's anger is always temporary, always under command, and always destined to break, because after the rod comes the branch. Isaiah said it plainly: Assyria would fall, just as every instrument of judgment eventually does, because God does not use tools forever. He uses them to refine, to correct, to shake, and then he sets them down. So the question is not whether judgment will come, it always does. The question is, what side will we be on when it does? Will we be the ones waking up to our pride too late, or the ones who let the warning in before the storm hits? Assyria thought they were in charge, but they were already under sentence. So is every rod that raises itself too high. Isaiah said it without flinching. God whistles, and empires come running, not praying, not seeking, just responding like beasts trained for the hunt. When the Lord lifts his hand, nations move. When he whistles, armies rise. It was not poetry, it was power. He spoke of Assyria like a tool. He spoke of Babylon like a shadow in waiting. He saw behind the thrones, behind the borders, behind the flags. To Isaiah, every nation was a hound on a leash, great and terrible. Yes, but never in control of its own strength. And that should terrify us, because we think we shape history, that kings decide, that treaties and missiles and economies are the weightiest things on earth. But Isaiah watched entire civilizations moved by one sound from heaven's lips. He saw the world as it truly is, not a chessboard, but a battlefield of obedience and rebellion, with God commanding even the wildest players. The whistle isn't always loud, Sometimes it's a whisper, a collapse, a shift, a sudden rise to power. One dictator topples, another emerges. One economy implodes, another soars. And behind it all, the hand that calls nations like hounds. But Isaiah also warned God does not call them forever, because those hounds bite, they overreach, they believe they are free, they forget who held the leash. And then, the same voice that called them out calls them back, and their day ends in dust and silence. It happened to Egypt, it happened to Assyria, it happened to Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. It will happen again. Isaiah saw the pattern and he put it in writing. When God wants to awaken a sleeping people, he doesn't always send peace. Sometimes he sends a storm, and sometimes the storm looks like an empire with no mercy. We ask why. Why would God use nations that don't even acknowledge him? Why let injustice rise? Why let tyrants breathe? Isaiah never blinked at that question, because he knew the leash never breaks, and judgment, even when it comes through evil hands, is still under holy control. But here's the other side. God whistles not just to punish, but to purge, to expose, to cleanse, to remind the world who actually sits on the throne. And when that time ends, when the hounds retreat, there's always a remnant, a flicker of hope, a seed in the ash. Because the point was never destruction, it was revelation. Isaiah wanted us to see what he saw. That history is not random, it's choreographed. The kingdoms of men rise at God's command and fall at his silence. The whistle is not the end, it's the warning. Isaiah did not speak in abstract riddles. He used roots and rivers, hills and harvests. He painted warnings in the shape of forests. And one day, he spoke of trees falling, not just a storm, not just a drought, but a judgment that would rip through creation itself. The mighty cedars would fall. The forests of Lebanon would bow. The earth would crack beneath the weight of sin. This wasn't just about woodlands. It was about the moral collapse of a people who no longer feared the one who planted the trees in the first place. Isaiah saw it coming long before the sky darkened. He watched as greed replaced reverence, as fields once used to feed the poor were fenced off for profit, as kings paved over justice to make space for palaces, as the songs of the vineyard turned bitter, and the soil itself began to choke. The land was not just suffering, it was reacting, because in Isaiah's world, the natural and the spiritual were never separate. The land groaned when righteousness vanished. The trees fell when truth was uprooted. It was all connected, always had been. We live as if the earth is silent, as if the ground beneath our feet is passive. But Isaiah said otherwise. He spoke of trees trembling under the judgment of heaven, of streams running dry not just from climate or chance, but because the covenant was broken. The day the trees fell was not just poetic, it was prophetic. A warning that when we lose the fear of God, we also lose the world he gave us. And he was right, because it has happened again and again. Forests cleared for empires, rivers poisoned for convenience, animals pushed to the edge for comfort, and always behind it the same sickness, pride, idolatry, injustice. Isaiah's vision is not stuck in the past. It stares into the future, into our future, where the collapse of character becomes the collapse of ecosystems, where the pollution of hearts spills into oceans and skies. He described a stump, a forest stripped down to nothing but ash and silence. But even then, Isaiah saw hope. A single shoot, a branch rising from the ruin, not man's recovery, God's mercy. The trees will fall. They have. They will again. But one tree, one branch will not. So Isaiah pleads with every generation, do not wait until the forest is gone to remember who made it. Do not wait until the harvest is lost to cry for the Lord of the vineyard, because the day the trees fell is not just about judgment. It is about the chance maybe the last chance to return before everything that still breathes goes silent. He stood on the wall when no one else would, not with a spear, not with a torch, but with a question burning in his bones. Watchman, what of the night? Isaiah was not just a prophet, he was a sentinel, a soul stationed between judgment and mercy. He did not sleep, he did not retreat. He watched long after others had turned away. The night he spoke of was not just dark sky. It was the shadow falling over a nation that had lost its way, a people who thought their rituals were enough, that they could buy off holiness with offerings, while corruption poisoned their courts and blood soaked their streets. Isaiah saw it all. He watched the slow decay of truth. He saw leaders lie while pretending to pray. He saw the vulnerable crushed while the powerful celebrated. And still, he stayed on the wall, watching, warning, weeping, but the question echoed louder than the answers. Watchman, what of the night? It's the question every generation asks when the world starts to unravel, when the foundations shake, when what used to make sense no longer holds. Is the night almost over, or is it just beginning? Isaiah answered with a riddle. The morning comes, and also the night. Meaning, there will be light, but not yet. There will be hope, but it won't come easy. First must come the reckoning. It is a terrifying role, to stand as a watchman and know what is coming, because it's not just about seeing. It's about being willing to speak, even when no one listens, even when it costs everything, even when the words themselves become a kind of wound. Isaiah carried that wound. He knew the people would not repent. He knew they would mock the warnings. He knew they would build alliances with foreign powers instead of returning to the Lord. And yet he watched. He stayed. We need that kind of watchman again. In a world that drowns out the alarms with entertainment and denial, we need voices willing to stand on the walls again, to cry out in the night, not with panic, but with clarity, to see the signs, to speak the truth, to refuse the comfort of silence. Isaiah was not just a voice for his time. He is a blueprint for ours. So the question still stands. Watchman, what of the night? And heaven still waits for someone bold enough to answer, to stand, to see, to speak, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Isaiah did not flinch when he spoke of fire. He did not soften the blow when he warned of cities flattened and nations scattered. He saw the judgment coming like a storm with no name, tearing down everything that called itself strong. But even then, even in the smoke and ash and silence, he whispered a phrase so quiet you might miss it. The remnant shall return. Not everyone. Not most. But some. A thread, not a rope. A spark, not a blaze. A sliver of holy defiance in a world gone numb. It was not just a prediction, it was a code, hidden in plain sight. Because Isaiah knew what it felt like to carry hope that looked like nothing. A word, a name, a child named Shear Jashub, a remnant shall return. His very existence was prophecy wrapped in skin. But return from what? From exile, from collapse, from compromise, from a culture that forgot its creator, and a people who traded glory for survival. Isaiah saw what was coming. The temples desecrated, the kings dethroned, the language twisted, the promises buried, and still he said it. The remnant shall return. Because God never needed a crowd to begin again. He only needed a seed, a soul, a whisper. Throughout history, the remnant has always been the beginning of the next chapter. The ones left behind when everything else fell apart. The ones who still remembered when everyone else forgot. The ones who carried fire in their bones when the world went cold. They are not perfect. They are not loud. They are not safe. But they are faithful. The remnant walks through ruins with their eyes fixed on a God who rebuilds from nothing. They hear his voice even when the prophets fall silent. They carry a future inside their bones even when there is no sign of it yet. And maybe that's the real miracle. Not that judgment comes, but that mercy survives it. Isaiah did not promise they would return quickly, or easily, or without loss. But he promised they would return, and when they did, they would be changed, humbled, purified, ready. The remnant shall return. It is not just a line from an old scroll. It is a word for every soul who looks at the world and feels the ache of something holy slipping away. For everyone who stays awake in the dark, still listening, still believing, still watching for the first flicker of dawn. You don't need to save the world. You just need to not let go. Because sometimes, the smallest remnant becomes the spark that starts everything again. There are words that age, and there are words that don't. Isaiah's warning did not crack or fade with the centuries. It burns hotter now than when it was first spoken. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. It sounds like thunder, but it was whispered first in a courtroom of the soul, because the greatest danger was never the armies at the gates. It was the collapse of the conscience inside. Isaiah watched a people twist morality until it fit their appetites. They did not stop worshiping. They just worshipped comfort. They did not outlaw justice. They redefined it. They renamed theft as gain. They baptized violence as strength. They polished lies until they shone like truth. He called it out. He stood against the tide and said what no one wanted to hear. You are upside down, and you don't even know it. And now look around. What was once hidden in shadow is paraded with pride. What was once shameful is sold as enlightenment. What was once sacred is ridiculed. And what was once wrong is now mandatory. Isaiah didn't blame the culture. He blamed the choices. One compromise at a time, one blind eye, one softened truth, until up became down and light became dark and no one could tell the difference anymore. This wasn't just about sinners out there. It was about a people who still prayed, still fasted, still offered sacrifices, but whose hearts had switched sides. Their lips praised, but their hands were stained. Their voices rose in worship, but their actions trampled the weak. It's chilling how easily it happens. You stop naming sin, and soon you stop noticing it. You stop noticing it, and soon you start defending it. Then you start celebrating it. Then you start punishing those who don't. Woe to those who call evil good. Isaiah did not say it with hate. He said it with grief. Because this path does not end in glory. It ends in ruin. A society that cannot tell the difference between poison and water will drink itself to death. But Isaiah did not only warn, he also pointed back to the plumb line, the standard, the unshakable truth of a holy God who never changes even when we do, even when the world does. You can rename it, reframe it, redefine it, but you cannot escape it, because truth does not need permission to remain true. So Isaiah stands in every generation, holding a mirror, not to mock but to wake, not to shame but to shake us loose from the sleep that turns darkness into light and light into darkness. And if you're still listening, then it's not too late. Isaiah saw more than borders. He saw more than Babylon, more than Assyria, more than the rising and falling of kings. His words began in Jerusalem, but they did not stay there. The further he went, the clearer it became this was not just about one nation's fall. It was about every nation's reckoning. The earth itself trembled in his visions. The sun darkened. The moon refused to shine. The stars fell like withered leaves shaken from the sky. These were not metaphors. These were warnings, and they reached far beyond the hills of Zion, because Isaiah spoke of a God who judges all, not just some, not just Judah, not just Israel, but every throne built on lies, every economy built on exploitation, every culture that traded truth for spectacle, every empire that played God while mocking the real one. He said the day would come when the Lord would sift the nations, like wheat through fingers, like dust through wind. Some would be scattered, some would be burned, and some, just a few, would remain. Not because they were stronger, not because they were wiser, but because they were humbled. Isaiah named names: Moab, Egypt, Damascus, Tyre, Cush, Babylon. All had their moment. All faced the fire. But then his gaze lifted higher, further, into something beyond headlines and maps. He spoke of a world stage, of global shaking, of judgment not contained by rivers or borders or armies. The whole earth would be laid bare. And does it not feel closer now than ever? When no nation is innocent. When technology unites and corrupts in the same breath. When wars echo across oceans and fear spreads faster than light. When every system groans, and no one seems to know why. Isaiah told us, he said the proud would be brought low, the lofty would be humbled. The idols would be shattered, the high towers would fall. Not just one by one, but all at once. It would be a sifting, not to destroy everything, but to reveal what cannot be shaken. What remains when kingdoms crumble? When riches vanish? When power collapses? Only truth, only righteousness, only the ones who still remember who sits above the circle of the earth. The sifting is not just a warning, it is a mercy. It removes what we cannot carry into the next world. It burns away the illusion so we can finally see what is real. Isaiah saw it coming. The question is, do we? He had time. He had warning. He had the prophet standing in front of him, offering the impossible. But Ahaz would not listen, and by the time he cried out, it was too late. King Ahaz sat on a throne soaked in fear. Judah was cornered, armies gathered like wolves. The northern kingdom had joined with Syria. The threat was real, and the people shook like trees in a storm. But God sent Isaiah with a strange offer. Ask for a sign, anything, as high as the heavens, or as deep as the grave. But Ahaz refused. He cloaked it in humility, said he would not test the Lord. But it was not humility. It was pride. It was unbelief, dressed in holy words. Because deep down, Ahaz had already made his choice. He had already written his letter to Assyria, already sold his soul for a promise of protection. He thought the empire would save him, and for a moment, it looked like it did. But Isaiah warned him, said the deal would backfire, said the empire he trusted would become the empire that devoured him, said the sign would still come, a child called Emmanuel, but not the kind of sign Ahaz wanted. Years passed, shadows grew, and the very nations Ahaz feared came crashing in, just as the prophet had said. The gods he sacrificed to did not answer. The temples he copied could not protect him. The alliances he forged chained him instead of saving him. And by the time the cries rose from Jerusalem, the king who would not believe was the king who could not escape. There is a silence that follows a rejected warning. It is not peaceful. It is heavy. The kind of silence that comes right before the crash. Ahaz lived in that silence. A man who had the chance to change everything and chose to do nothing. And today, we still think there will always be more time. We imagine we can delay truth, push it off, revisit it later, after this deal, after this crisis, after this comfort. But what if the window is narrower than we think? Ahaz heard the voice of God through Isaiah, clear, direct, full of hope. But his ears were closed long before his kingdom fell. His heart had already bowed to another power, so the tears came too late. Because repentance is not just about weeping, it is about surrender. And Ahaz never surrendered. Isaiah never forgot him, a king who stood at the crossroads of history and turned the wrong way. He did not fall because he lacked warning. He fell because he refused it. And now his story stands as one more echo in the book of the prophet. One more voice whispering across time. Do not wait until the pain drowns out the chance. Isaiah did not just see the glory of God. He also saw the silence. He once cried out, "Truly, you are a God who hides yourself." And that one line has echoed through centuries, like a locked door no one can open. What does it mean when God, who once thundered on Sinai, who once parted seas, who once scorched altars with fire, goes quiet. The people Isaiah walked among were not atheists. They had gods on every corner, statues, shrines, rituals. They spoke the name of the Lord with their mouths, but their hearts were distant, and Isaiah knew. He could feel it. The real God had stepped back, not out of weakness, not out of absence, but judgment. Isaiah's world was full of noise, political bargains, military threats, religious theater. But the voice that mattered, the voice that could still the storms, had grown faint, withdrawn, hidden, and maybe that was the most terrifying judgment of all. Because when God hides, everything starts to look the same. Evil prospers, truth bends, darkness feels normal. The absence of fire is not peace, it is coldness. And Isaiah felt that chill in his bones. There were moments he begged, "How long, O Lord?" There were nights the silence roared louder than thunder. And yet, still, he believed, because the hidden God is not the absent God. Sometimes he hides to test, sometimes he hides to refine, sometimes he hides to show us how blind we've become, so that when he returns, there's no mistake. Isaiah spoke to a people who had grown too used to the silence. They mistook it for approval. They mistook delay for permission. But the prophet warned them God is not mocked. He hides, yes, but he also sees. He also waits. And when he moves again, it will be unmistakable. He told them, "In that day, you will weep for the one you turned away. You will search for him and find only echoes, until the time of mercy returns." And maybe that's what we feel now. The tension of a world where wrong is loud and right is lonely, where the heavens seem still while the earth burns, where we wonder, did we miss something? Did we trade the living voice for clever noise? Isaiah would say yes, but he would also say, wait, watch. The hidden God is not gone. He is not asleep. He is drawing near. And when he breaks the silence, every false light will flicker out. So hold your breath. The silence is not the end. It's the warning before the return. Isaiah saw a cup, not of wine, not of water, but something darker. A cup filled with staggering. A cup that made nations drunk, not with joy, but with madness. He called it the cup of trembling. God would hand it to the proud, to the powerful, to the nations that built their thrones on blood and their walls on lies. He would say, drink this, all of it, and once they drank, nothing would be the same. Kings would stumble like beggars, cities would forget their own names, armies would turn on themselves, and the prophets who once shouted victory would fall silent, their mouths too full of dust to speak. Because this wasn't just a symbol, it was a sentence. Isaiah watched empires rise like smoke and fall like ashes. Assyria, Babylon, Egypt, they all thought they were different. They all thought their gods were stronger, their strategies smarter, their seers clearer. But they all drank from the same cup, and the cup never lies. It's the cost of defiance, the price of pride. You can build towers, make treaties, pass laws, control media, but you cannot rewrite the contents of that cup. Isaiah said, "Woe to the nation that forgets justice. Woe to the people who call evil good. Woe to the leaders who trust in idols and mock the word of the Lord. They will drink and they will tremble." That trembling isn't fear alone. It's confusion, chaos, a kind of spiritual vertigo. The ground feels wrong. Truth feels strange. The voice of conscience gets buried under 1,000 clever distractions, and still they keep drinking. What makes the cup so terrifying is that those who drink it often don't know they're drunk. Not at first. They think it's strength. They think it's freedom. But their hands shake when no one's watching. Their eyes won't focus. And their steps, once bold, begin to falter. Isaiah wept when he saw it, because it was not just about ancient kingdoms. It was about every age, every empire that forgets its place, every society that crowns itself and thinks judgment will never come. And maybe that's the most haunting part, because we've seen that trembling, haven't we? In headlines that make no sense, in wars that ignite without reason, in leaders who seem more like shadows than shepherds, in a culture that laughs at truth but chokes on meaning. The cup is still full, and it passes quietly, hand to hand, nation to nation. Isaiah's voice breaks through the centuries not to condemn, but to warn. You can still put it down, but only if you recognize what you're holding. Only if you stop long enough to feel the tremble. Before the cup spills over, they walked like royalty, heads high, eyes proud, steps measured to a rhythm only they could hear. Their jewelry caught the Sunday. Their perfumes filled the air before they entered a room. These were the daughters of Zion, elegant, untouchable, admired. But Isaiah didn't see beauty. He saw a warning wrapped in silk and gold. He said their finery would rot, their anklets would turn to shackles, their mirrors would crack, their hair would fall out in clumps. The perfume would be replaced by the stench of decay. What they thought made them powerful would betray them. What made them confident would be the very thing that marked their fall. Because it wasn't about fashion. It was about pride. They had become symbols of a nation too obsessed with surface to notice the sickness beneath. While the poor begged at the gates, while widows went hungry, while justice was twisted, the daughters of Zion twirled in gowns that whispered of wealth and detachment. They became the face of a culture that celebrated appearance and ignored substance. Isaiah's words weren't just angry, they were surgical. He named every item, every ornament, every little detail they used to elevate themselves above others. Not to shame them, but to show how far the rot had spread. This wasn't just about women. It was about a system, a mindset, a sickness in the soul of a people who had forgotten how to mourn, forgotten how to care, forgotten how to fear God. And when judgment came, it came quietly at first. No trumpet blasts, just a hollowing, a fading, a turning of heads that used to admire and now only pity. Isaiah said it like this: instead of beauty, there would be branding. Instead of celebration, mourning. The mighty daughters would sit on the ground, stripped of illusion, and realize they were not queens, they were dust. It's easy to dismiss these verses as ancient poetry, a scolding from a prophet long dead. But look around. The obsession with image, the worship of lifestyle, the constant chase for status, attention, likes, luxury. Has anything really changed? Isaiah wasn't attacking fashion. He was exposing idolatry. The daughters of Zion fell not because they wore earrings or silk, but because they forgot who they were. They forgot what holiness looked like. They confused beauty with power, elegance with virtue, comfort with safety. And so the fall began. Today, the same spirit lives on in boardrooms and red carpets, in curated feeds and filtered lives. The warning still echoes, not to destroy but to awaken, to remind us that when pride walks in heels, it still stumbles. When nations dress their sins in gold, judgment sees through every thread. And sometimes, the harshest prophecy is simply this: your mirror lies. It begins like a love song, a vineyard planted with care, a hillside cleared of stones, the finest vines chosen, a watchtower built, a winepress carved, every detail whispered devotion. Every stroke of preparation said, "This matters." It was not a careless planting. It was deliberate, lavish, hopeful. And then the waiting. The owner expected sweet grapes. That was the point. That was the reward. But when harvest came, something was wrong. The fruit was bitter, wild, rotten, not just disappointing, offensive. The vineyard had every advantage, every opportunity, every blessing, and still, it failed. So the song shifts, the music darkens. The voice that once sang with longing now trembles with grief. What more could I have done? It's a question that hangs in the air, not just about vines, but about people, about a nation, about hearts. Isaiah pulls back the curtain. The vineyard is not a vineyard. It is Judah. The vines are not vines. They are lives. The wild grapes are injustice, bloodshed, lies. The song was never just about farming. It was about betrayal. God gave them everything, a land, a law, a promise. And they gave him corruption, oppression, arrogance. They sang their own songs, songs of power, of wealth, of self. So the judgment begins, not with thunder, but with silence. The vineyard will be abandoned. No pruning, no rain, no walls, no care, just exposure, just wilderness. And here's the part that haunts. The owner doesn't destroy the vineyard outright. He simply stops protecting it. That's the terrifying part of divine judgment. Sometimes it's not fire, it's withdrawal. Sometimes the worst punishment isn't wrath, it's absence. A vineyard left alone is a vineyard doomed. It cannot protect itself. It cannot fix itself. Without the gardener's touch, it withers. Isaiah's parable is not ancient fiction. It is a mirror. It's a warning to any nation, any people, any soul that thinks blessing is permanent, that thinks privilege guarantees safety. It's a reminder that fruit is expected, that care must be answered with character. And it ends with this. God looked for justice, but saw bloodshed. He looked for righteousness, but heard the cries of the oppressed. That is the punchline. That is the sting. It means that God listens to the voices the powerful ignore. It means that God sees what we try to bury. It means that God judges not by what we claim, but by what we produce. The song of the vineyard starts in beauty, but it ends in silence. Not because God stopped loving, but because his love was rejected. And now, the field lies open. The thorns creep in, and the question returns. What more could he have done? It does not begin with the fruit, not with the branches, not even with the trunk. When judgment truly comes, it begins underground where the roots twist in secret. Isaiah does not speak of pruning. He speaks of burning, not a surface blaze, but a fire that sinks deep, a fire that reaches what no eye can see. This is not about appearances anymore. It is about essence, about what holds you up when no one's looking. The prophet watched a society that thought itself invincible. Temples stood tall, rituals continued, kings ruled, markets buzzed, but the roots had already turned black and rot. Once it begins below, makes its way up. Isaiah's words are chilling in their precision. He says the people have rejected the Holy One, not just disobeyed but despised. They have called good evil, and evil good. They have honored lies while silencing truth. They have mocked the warnings, laughed at the prophets, chosen convenience over conviction. And now, the fire comes, not to trim, to consume. And here's what terrifies. Isaiah says their roots will be as rottenness. Their blossom will go up like dust. That means the judgment is not arbitrary. It is natural. If the roots are corrupted, the flower cannot survive. If the soul is diseased, no performance can mask it. A tree may still bear leaves for a season, but death is coming from within. This is a warning far deeper than behavior. It is about foundation. It is about the unseen life, the things whispered in private, the values that shape every choice. What do you run to when no one watches? What do you worship when your hands are empty? Isaiah saw that the people had built altars, not just with stone, but with their hearts. And those altars were to self, to status, to power. Their religion had a form but no fire. Their leaders quoted scripture but lived contradiction. And their justice? For sale. So the fire was not merely punishment. It was exposure. It revealed what had always been growing beneath. And still, there is hope tucked in the ashes, because fire, though it destroys, also purifies. Roots can be reborn, but only if the old ones die first. And that is the choice Isaiah holds before us. Will we cling to what is rotting, or will we let the fire do its work? Because judgment does not always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it starts beneath the soil. And by the time the tree falls, the death was already decided long ago deep in the roots. Section IV. The book sealed. Isaiah wrote down what he saw, but not everyone could read it. He spoke to kings who sneered, to priests who rolled their eyes, to crowds who nodded politely while their hearts wandered. So when the visions burned too bright, when the truths cut too deep, he sealed them, not because he was hiding, but because they wouldn't understand. He described it like a scroll handed to two people. One says, "I can't read, I'm unlearned." The other says, "I can read, but this scroll is sealed." Either way, no one listens, and so the truth sits in silence. Isaiah called this generation deaf and blind. Not by accident, by choice. They heard the words but refused the meaning. They saw the signs but dismissed the source. So God told him, write it down anyway. Preserve the vision. Seal the testimony among the disciples. Because it wasn't just for now. It was for later. Maybe for us. That's the haunting beauty of prophecy. It stretches beyond its own moment. Isaiah spoke into a world collapsing under its own arrogance, but his words echo in ours. The scroll remains, waiting for eyes willing to see, and some of it feels like it was never meant to be understood in the time it was given. Phrases like, a stone in Zion, a light to the nations, a child called everlasting, names that meant one thing then, but far more now. Hints dropped like seeds in the soil of history, waiting for the right season to bloom. God said these people honored him with their lips, but their hearts were far away. Their worship was routine, taught by rote, emptied of wonder. So he would do something strange, something marvelous, something they would not believe even if told. And in that moment, the scroll would begin to unseal. This is not just about ancient Israel anymore. It's about the human heart. It's about what happens when truth is offered, again and again. But we ask for another sign instead. It's about the danger of becoming fluent in religion while being deaf to revelation. Isaiah knew his scroll was a time bomb, wrapped in poetry, coded in symbols, meant to endure centuries of dust and denial, because one day, someone would read it not as history but as headline, and their eyes would open. Maybe that someone is you. Maybe that day is now. There are moments in Scripture when the ground does more than tremble, it testifies. Isaiah described a time when the earth itself would reel like a drunkard, sway like a hut in the wind, and fall, never to rise again. This was not poetic metaphor. It was divine warning written into the tectonic groans of creation, a shaking so vast, so unnatural, it could only mean one thing. Heaven was intervening. In the prophet's world, the land was sacred, stable, given by God and held firm by his covenant. So when the earth shook, it meant something had gone terribly wrong. Sin had reached the soil. Blood had soaked into the dust. Idols had been carved from the very rock meant to honor the Creator. And the earth responded not passively, but violently. Isaiah's visions stretched beyond local tremors. He spoke of the moon being disgraced, the sun ashamed, the stars falling. He saw the foundations of the world shuddering under the weight of judgment. This was not just an empire collapsing, it was creation convulsing. And it mirrors something terrifying, because centuries later, another prophet, John, on the island of Patmos would echo the same imagery. A great quake, a sky split apart, islands vanishing, mountains dislodged, the same cosmic disorder, the same terrifying unraveling, as if Isaiah's scroll had been unsealed and was still unfolding. Today, when we hear the ground crack or watch the seas surge or feel the buildings sway, we rush to explain it with science. Plates shifting, pressure releasing, fault lines adjusting. But Isaiah would say, listen closer. These are not just geological events, they are moral ones. Echoes of a deeper shaking, a reckoning coming closer. What if the earth is not just a backdrop to our story, but a character in it, one that groans, as Paul would later write, waiting for redemption, one that knows when blood cries out, when injustice becomes too heavy, when idols grow too many, one that cannot bear the weight of unrepented sin forever. Isaiah warned of a day when God would rise to shake terribly the earth, not as punishment alone, but as purification, a clearing, a resetting, a terrifying mercy. We are used to thinking of judgment as thunder from above, but sometimes it begins beneath our feet, and when it does, when the streets crack, the walls crumble, and the ground refuses to hold our weight, Isaiah's voice rises through the dust, not in panic, but in prophecy. This was written. This was warned, and still, the shaking is mercy compared to the silence. It begins like poetry but ends like a curse. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? Words that shimmer with mystery, echoing through centuries of theology, speculation, and fear. Was Isaiah speaking of a king or of something older? The name Lucifer never appears again in Scripture, not like this. Just once. A Latin translation of a Hebrew word that meant light bringer or shining one. A name never meant to be a name. But it stuck, and it burned. Isaiah was warning against the pride of Babylon, mocking the king who thought himself untouchable. He described a fall from glory so violent, it rattled the very stars. This was no ordinary man's fall. This was cosmic, celestial, a plunge from heaven to Sheol, from exalted throne to shattered ruin. But something deeper flickers behind the language. A double meaning, almost impossible to ignore. Who rises above the clouds? Who says, I will ascend into heaven? Who dreams of placing his throne beside the Most High? Not just kings, not just tyrants, something else, someone else. Ancient interpreters began to see in this passage a glimpse behind the curtain, not just a political fall, but a spiritual one, an echo of a rebellion older than Babylon, the first pride, the first exile, the first lie whispered into the fabric of creation. You can be like God. Lucifer, as tradition would later name him, was not thrown down because of weakness, but because of ambition. He reached too high, and in doing so, became the symbol of every empire that exalts itself, every leader who worships their own reflection, every soul that forgets it was made, not born to rule. Isaiah's words are dangerous because they live in two worlds at once. They condemn a mortal king, yes, but they also hint at something behind the mortal. The spirit of pride that haunts every throne, the unseen hand that tempts power toward corruption, the shadow behind the crown, and maybe that's the real terror. Not that one angel fell, but that his fall became a pattern, a template, a virus. How many have since said those same 5 words? I will ascend. I will rise. Isaiah watched empires climb skyward and crash down flaming, and in the ashes, he left us this strange, flickering verse, a mirror, a warning, a question. Who is Lucifer? And more urgently, are we becoming him? Babylon fell once. Everyone knows that. The river turned against her. The gates swung open, and the armies of Persia walked in without a battle. But Isaiah spoke of a fall so complete, so final, it sounded like the end of the world. The kind of fall that doesn't just erase a city, it erases an idea. Centuries later, Babylon was rubble, and yet the vision still lingered. Isaiah had described it as if it were happening in slow motion, echoing across time. The desert beasts would cry in its ruins. The lanterns of its watchmen would go out forever. The city once called the Jewel of Kingdoms would become a haunt for owls and jackals. But here's the question, why did he speak of it as if it had not yet happened? Some scholars say it's just poetic delay. Prophetic language is often timeless, they argue. But others hear something stranger in Isaiah's tone, a warning not just for the ancient world but for something yet to come. In the book of Revelation, Babylon reappears. But this time, it's not brick and mortar. It's system. It's spirit. It's global. The merchants of the earth mourn when it falls. The kings who slept with her weep from a distance. A single hour undoes her pride, her wealth, her power, and once again the cry goes out. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. Is it metaphor? Or is it a pattern? Every empire builds its own version of Babylon. A shining city built on trade and might, draped in gold, promising peace but delivering dominance. Isaiah saw through it. He saw the seduction. He saw the rot behind the glamour. And he saw the fire waiting at the edge. The frightening thing is not just that Babylon fell twice. It's that it keeps coming back. Every time we place power above justice, we resurrect her. Every time we turn truth into a commodity, we lay her foundations. And every time we convince ourselves that nothing can shake us, that's when the writing appears on the wall. Isaiah did not just prophesy Babylon's fall. He diagnosed humanity's sickness, pride without limits, luxury without conscience, security without humility. The fall of Babylon is not just history, it's prophecy with teeth, and it asks every generation the same question. What are you building? And how high will it rise before it burns? Isaiah whispered something strange buried in the middle of a judgment against a corrupt official. He said the key of David would be placed on another man's shoulder, a key that opens and no one shuts, a key that shuts and no one opens. And then he moved on, as if it meant nothing, but it meant everything. This was no ordinary key. David had long since died. His palace doors had turned to dust. So what kind of key could this be? And why did it matter? The phrase reappears once, and only once, centuries later. Not in the mouth of a prophet, but in the words of a voice like thunder. In the Revelation, the one who holds the key of David speaks again. He stands before a church on the edge of collapse, and he says, "See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut." Suddenly, the key is not about politics. It is about access, authority, a divine veto, a lock that separates the seen from the unseen, the now from the not yet. Some believe the key of David is a symbol of messianic power control over destiny itself, the right to admit or deny. The one with the key decides what happens next. Others think it is tied to the temple. The key opens the inner chambers, the holy, the hidden, the heart of God's plan. But what if it's more than that? What if Isaiah saw something far beyond his time? What if he glimpsed a transfer of cosmic authority, a shift in who holds the future, from human rulers who crumble to someone who never does? The terrifying thing is not that the key exists, it's that someone is already using it. Not everyone gets in, not every door stays open. Isaiah saw judgment and mercy woven together like threads of fire. He saw doors swing open in moments of grace and slam shut in moments of pride. And you can't pick this lock. You can't force it. You can only respond before the door moves. In a world obsessed with control, the key of David reminds us we never had it. One opens, one closes, one decides. So the only question is, are you on the right side of the door when it does? Isaiah saw something strange in the wasteland's deserts blooming with life, springs bursting from dry earth, flowers covering the wilderness like a miracle. It sounded like hope, but buried in the beauty was a warning, because the blossoming was not permanent. It was a sign. The prophet spoke of a time when the natural world would react, not just to weather, but to decisions. When streams would appear in parched places, then dry up again. When the land itself would reflect the soul of the people living on it. And when judgment came, it would not begin with thunder from the heavens, but with cracked soil and poisoned air. The language shifts quickly. Joy turns to terror. Isaiah describes the earth mourning, trees withering, fields stripped bare, forests once alive with birds falling silent. He saw fire licking across mountains, animals fleeing, even rivers drying to bones. He did not have the words for climate crisis, but he saw it. He did not speak of carbon or greenhouse gases, but he saw the land groaning, the skies dimming, the heat rising, and he tied it to human arrogance. The land is not cursed on its own, Isaiah says. It becomes cursed when people forget who they are, when greed replaces gratitude, when idols take the place of truth, when leaders trample the poor and call it progress. Then the earth reacts, not as punishment but as consequence. The blossoming desert was mercy, a window, a chance to turn back. But mercy has a timer. If the earth was meant to reflect heaven, then it also reveals hell when we force it. And Isaiah did not just speak to his time. His words sound like they were written for this one. Satellite images now show deserts blooming in places they shouldn't. Record temperatures crack the earth open. Rivers once mighty now vanish. And fires burn longer, hotter, and faster than they ever have before. We want to believe it's all coincidence, that nature is just adjusting. But the prophets say otherwise. Isaiah saw the desert blossom. Then he saw it burn, not just once, but in patterns, in cycles, in waves. The land responds to the soul of a nation, and when the soul forgets its maker, the ground forgets how to hold rain. So ask yourself, what season are we in now? Are we walking through the miracle, or ignoring the warning before the flame? He was not dressed like a priest. He had no crown, no title, no seat at the table, just a voice, crying from the wilderness. Isaiah saw him long before he came, a solitary figure shouting into empty air, calling for something no one wanted: repentance. Make the crooked straight, level the hills, clear the rocks, prepare the way. But for whom? At first it seemed like a metaphor, a poetic image. But the wording stuck, like thorns behind the eyes. A voice, not a man, not a movement, just a sound in the silence. A sound that does not wait for applause or echo. It just speaks, and keeps speaking, even when no one listens. Centuries passed, and then came John. He fit the image too well to ignore. Wild hair, rough clothes, a diet pulled straight from the ground. He called himself that voice. He claimed the prophecy, and many believed him. But Isaiah never said there would be only one. He described a pattern, not a person. A pattern of sudden voices that cut through comfort, that emerge from places people avoid, that do not flatter kings or conform to temples. Voices that speak truth without polish, warnings without pause. They appear when the world has gotten too quiet, too civilized, too numb, and they always sound like trouble, because the voice in the wilderness never speaks to entertain. It speaks to shake, to call things out, to drag hidden things into the light, to warn that the path ahead is not ready for the one who is coming. John was one voice, but not the last. Isaiah's prophecy may stretch further than anyone guessed. It may be that more voices are still to rise, from cities turned to ruins, from children with nothing left to lose, from nations collapsing under their own weight. They will not wear suits. They will not sound safe. They will say things that make even the righteous squirm. And the wilderness, that's not just a place anymore. It's a condition, a spiritual wasteland, a silence where no one knows what's real, a famine of truth in a world stuffed with information. In that wilderness, the voice will rise again. And when it does, the question won't be, do we agree? It will be, will we make way? Because someone always comes after the voice, and the road must be cleared. He had no beauty, no form that drew the eye, no charisma to make the crowds follow. Just sorrow, just wounds, just silence. Isaiah wrote about him in a chapter so strange, so haunting, that it has stirred debate for over 2,000 years. Some say it speaks of Israel. Others insist it speaks of one man. But whoever it speaks of, it bleeds. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, familiar with grief, not just suffering but chosen for it, crushed, not by accident but by design, pierced, not by random violence, but for others. The punishment that brought peace fell on him. That is the claim, and that is why Isaiah 53 frightens so many. Because if it was about someone already come, then it matches too closely. If it was about someone still to come, then it warns too sharply. Either way, it cannot be brushed off. It will not stay quiet. The chapter is like a courtroom confession sealed in an ancient scroll signed before the crime, describing wounds before the weapon, predicting rejection before the name is even known. And the strangest part? The subject never protests. He does not cry out. He does not resist. Like a lamb led to the slaughter, he accepts the sentence, as if the execution itself is the mission. But who is he? Some say it was Israel, suffering for the sins of the world. Others say it was Isaiah himself, or a righteous remnant. But one detail keeps returning. By his wounds we are healed, not their wounds. His, not a people, a person, a servant, innocent, yet stricken, silent, yet prophetic, killed, yet somehow not defeated. In fact, Isaiah says he will see the light of life and be satisfied after death. That part breaks logic. It does not fit into any clean timeline. It does not sit easily in historical boxes. It haunts the reader because it dares to suggest that suffering can be sacred, that pain can be part of a plan, that blood can carry meaning. This is no ordinary prophecy. It cuts both ways, past and future. It whispers through centuries of songs and shadows. It moves between Jewish readings and Christian faith, between history and mystery. It refuses to be silenced, because if it is true, if even half of it is true, then someone suffered not just with us, but for us. And that would change everything. He didn't just carry the sin, he carried the silence that came after it. The ache of abandonment, the bitter taste of being misunderstood by the very ones he came to rescue. He bore it all not just in his body, but in his soul. Isaiah doesn't describe a hero with a sword or a king with a crown. He sketches a figure bent beneath invisible burdens, a servant who feels the cold stare of a crowd that once shouted his name, now whispering his guilt. A man who walks into judgment, not because he must, but because he chooses to. And in doing so, carries the grief of others like it was his own. That's the part we don't like to see. Not just that he suffered, but that he felt. That each lash, each betrayal, each rejection, pressed deeper into something more than flesh, into loneliness, into heartbreak, into knowing he would not be believed. He bore our sorrows, not just our mistakes. He bore the weight of mothers who lost their children, of fathers who returned from war to silence, of lovers abandoned in hospital corridors. He bore the empty chair at the table, the unanswered prayer, the final breath of the innocent, not to erase these things but to feel them with us. That is the Messiah Isaiah saw, not just a scapegoat, a sufferer. And that makes everything harder, because it means God did not stay above the sorrow. He stepped into it, with eyes that wept, with arms that trembled, with a heart that knew loss. And still, the world turned its face. We thought he was cursed. We thought he had failed. But maybe it was our vision that was broken. Maybe we didn't want a Messiah who cried. We wanted power, not pain, victory, not vulnerability. But Isaiah's prophecy does not flinch. It says he was pierced for us, that healing would come through him, and that the path to peace would first pass through agony. This is not a story of escape. It's a story of embrace, of a man who took our sorrow, not because he had to, but because he loved too deeply not to, who walked into the darkest place and said, "I'll carry that," and then did. Even now, in the hush between verses, you can almost hear it, that echo of grief, not wasted, but transformed, not denied, but redeemed. He bore our sorrows, all of them, and that changes how we carry ours. It is the kind of sentence you hear in hospital rooms, in war zones, in whispered prayers beside broken beds. By his stripes we are healed. The words sound like comfort, but they come wrapped in blood. The word stripes is gentle in our language now, but in Isaiah's world it meant lashes, whip marks, torn flesh. It meant punishment so violent the body split. And Isaiah dares to say that pain was not random, that it was not wasted, that somehow it did something, not to the one being punished, but to us. That is the great reversal. The one beaten is the one who saves. The one broken is the one who heals. It makes no earthly sense, and maybe that is the point, because healing, true healing, was never going to come cheap. Not the kind that mends more than skin, the kind that reaches into memory and soul and history, the kind that undoes what evil has layered on us like scars. That healing needs something more than medicine, more than time. It needs sacrifice, and Isaiah saw it centuries before it happened. He saw a man unjustly condemned, struck again and again until he was unrecognizable. And yet Isaiah says this is what made us whole. Not because suffering is good, but because love entered it, because divinity did not look away. It stepped into the fire and let the fire do its worst, and still responded with grace. By his stripes we are healed, not just in theory, in blood, in bruises, in a real body that broke so ours might not stay broken forever. It's a hard thing to accept, especially in a world that avoids pain at all costs. We want healing to come clean, painless, polished. But Isaiah says, no, it came through agony, through injustice, through the suffering of someone who didn't deserve it, and still said yes, still bore it, still forgave. Maybe that's why the verse keeps showing up, in hymnals, on hospital walls, in the quiet moments before surgery. Because deep down, we all need to believe there is a healing that goes deeper than what doctors can touch. A healing that costs more than we can pay but has already been paid for. By his stripes, we are healed, not because the pain was fair, but because the love was real. He said the words almost too casually, as if they were ordinary. Behold, I create new heavens and a new earth. But they are not ordinary. They are seismic. They tilt the axis of time itself, because they suggest something many people fear to admit out loud. This world, this age, this system is not the final version, and it was never meant to be. Isaiah did not describe just the end of a city, or a kingdom, or a nation. He described the end of everything broken, and the beginning of something unrecognizably whole. A world where the former things will not even come to mind, where memory itself is healed, not erased, redeemed. And here's the mystery. This vision did not come at the height of comfort or prosperity. It came during ruin, during collapse, when hope was a dying ember and fear ruled the night. That's when Isaiah dared to speak of a day no one could yet imagine. A day beyond exile, beyond empire, beyond the reach of even death. A new earth, a new sky, a new order that does not just patch the old one, it replaces it completely. In Isaiah's prophecy, this new world is not abstract. It is tactile, alive. People build homes and live in them. They plant vineyards and enjoy the fruit. No more stolen harvests. No more funerals for children. No more labor wasted. No more lives cut short. It sounds too good, like something from a child's dream. And yet it is also fiercely just. It is not soft or sentimental. In this new creation, the wolf lies with the lamb, but not because the wolf got tamed by force, because its very nature changed. Predators become protectors. Enemies become family. The curse of bloodshed is lifted, not paused, undone. That is Isaiah's bold claim. That the entire structure of creation will be rewritten. That the laws we take for granted, entropy, violence, grief, will be overturned, and something deeper will be revealed beneath them, something original, something beautiful, but it will not come gently. Throughout Isaiah's scroll, there are hints, flashes of a cleansing fire, of judgment that purifies, of shaking that tears down what cannot last, so that what is eternal can rise. This new heaven and earth is not built on convenience. It is born through labor pains, through cosmic disruption. And yet, somehow, at the heart of all that chaos, Isaiah says God is rejoicing, not in destruction, but in the restoration that follows it, in the return of harmony, in the reunion of creator and creation, in a world where prayers no longer go unanswered, because suffering no longer exists to provoke them. It's tempting to file this away as metaphor, to make it safe, symbolic. But Isaiah never speaks like he's dealing in mere poetry. He speaks like a man who has seen something, like a man who looked beyond the veil and lived to tell about it. And what he saw was not just an ending, it was a beginning, one that is coming, and closer than we think. It sounds like a fable at first. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the goat, the lion shall eat straw like the ox. No harm, no destruction, not even in the wildest places. But Isaiah wasn't writing a bedtime story. He was warning us, then inviting us. This image, as gentle as it seems, is not passive. It is the result of something cataclysmic, because wolves do not just stop hunting, lions do not forget blood. The law of the jungle is not suspended by accident, it is rewritten, which means something bigger had to break before it could heal. So is this a literal vision of a future world where predators forget how to kill? Or is it something deeper, an encrypted code about human nature, war, and what happens when justice finally wins? The people Isaiah spoke to were surrounded by wolves of a different kind, empires circling, armies poised. Violence was not theoretical, it was daily, brutal, and expected. And yet, in that context, he dared to describe a world without fear, not a world without memory, but a world where memory no longer poisons the present, a world where former enemies share fields instead of graves. And it is not just the animals that change. Children walk freely in places that once swallowed life. A child plays near the hole of a serpent and is not harmed. Why? Because what once struck without warning now holds no venom. The very instincts of nature are transformed. Isaiah called this the knowledge of the Lord covering the earth like the sea covers the ocean floor. Not in patches, not in streaks, in fullness, no gaps, no missed corners. Every heart, every nation, every system, healed or replaced. But here's the challenge: do we wait for this? Or are we meant to build toward it? Because if this is only a distant utopia, something that arrives from the sky after everything burns, then it asks nothing of us now. But if Isaiah's vision is also a mirror, then maybe it's a challenge. Maybe he's asking if we will choose the wolf or the lamb, if we will be the voice of peace in a world wired for war. And maybe, just maybe, the reason Isaiah told us so plainly what he saw is because part of us already knows it's possible. Not because we're good enough to make it happen, but because we've been shown the ending, and the ending is peace, not imaginary. Not metaphor, but real. And waiting. The high places will fall. The proud peaks will bow. Every mountain brought low. That's what Isaiah said. And when he said it, he wasn't just talking about geography. Or maybe he was, because the language is layered. On the surface, it sounds poetic, majestic hills humbled, crooked paths made straight, rough places smoothed like glass. But buried beneath the words is the heartbeat of a revolution. A world reordered. A creation reset. Isaiah lived in a time when mountains weren't just landforms. They were symbols, power, permanence, and pride. Kingdoms built their temples on them. Fortresses were carved into them. They stretched toward heaven as if man could claim the sky. But Isaiah saw something else. He saw the day when even the most immovable things would be shaken. Now here's the question. Was he seeing metaphor, or was he glimpsing tectonic upheaval, planetary trembling, something cataclysmic? Modern minds scoff. Mountains don't just collapse, continents don't rearrange, but history says otherwise. Entire valleys have risen, ranges have split. The earth has a memory of violence written in stone. And Isaiah? He may have been reading from that same script, because in his vision, the valleys rise and the heights descend not for destruction, but for alignment. A world recalibrated around justice, not hierarchy. The exalted made low, the lowly lifted up, not by politics, not by war, but by the hand of something far beyond. And it does something to the heart, doesn't it? The idea that every peak of arrogance, every system that towered over the weak, every monument built to self will crumble, not with noise, but with finality. Gone. But here's the twist. The mountains inside us are no different. Pride, greed, ego, false security. Those rise too, don't they? And maybe Isaiah was warning us that those are the first to go. Because the world cannot be transformed until the heart island. So whether the mountains fall in rock or in spirit, the message remains. The world will not stay as it island. Elevation is temporary. Only truth is permanent. And when that day comes, when the hills sink and the valleys rise, it will not be chaos. It will be restoration. Isaiah saw it. And now, so do we. The city once pulsed with pride. Towers glittered. Lights never dimmed. Markets roared with commerce. Streets echoed with the footsteps of ambition. But Isaiah looked past the splendor and saw something else. A fracture, a shudder in the bones of civilization. And then he said it plainly. The city of confusion is broken down. He didn't name it. That's what makes the warning so terrifying. It could have been Babylon, could have been Nineveh, could have been Rome, or maybe what he saw hadn't yet been built. Maybe he wasn't looking backward at ruins but forward at skylines that had not yet touched the sky. Cities that would one day rise, only to fall the same way they came loudly, suddenly, and with great confusion. Isaiah's phrase is surgical, city of confusion. In the original language, it implies chaos, meaninglessness, disorder at the foundation. A city that looks strong but is sick beneath the surface. Not broken by siege towers or battering rams, but by something far worse, internal collapse. The erosion of truth, the triumph of lies, the replacement of wisdom with noise. Sound familiar? We live in cities of confusion now. Concrete kingdoms where everything is connected and yet nothing feels real. Where truth has 1,000 versions and no anchor. Where wealth screams louder than mercy. Where buildings grow taller while souls grow thinner. Where surveillance is called safety and silence is called peace. Isaiah's city is not a relic. It is a mirror, and he said it would break, not slowly, not with time, but suddenly. Like Babel before it. That's the ancient echo buried beneath the warning. Because Babel, too, was a city of confusion. That's what the word means, to confuse. A place built on human pride, technological ambition, and a desire to dethrone the heavens. And how did it end? Not with an enemy's sword, but with the collapse of understanding itself. One day, they spoke the same language. The next, they couldn't even build. Isaiah saw that spirit return, again and again. He saw cities that rise on information but not wisdom, cities that run on power but not righteousness, cities where the name of God is just another brand to sell. And he saw what happens when the scaffolding of illusion finally gives way. The collapse is not only physical, it is moral, cultural, spiritual. People wander, not knowing why their peace is gone. Institutions decay. Justice becomes a slogan. The center does not hold. And then the city falls. But Isaiah didn't just leave us in the rubble, because what follows the fall is not silence, but clarity. In the absence of the noise, people begin to hear again. In the ruins, something ancient begins to grow. A remnant remembers. A new foundation is laid not in stone but in truth, not in pride but in humility, not in confusion but in light. The fall of the city is not the end. It is the mercy that clears the ground for what must come next. So when Isaiah said the city of confusion is broken down, he wasn't cursing a place, he was warning a people, a culture, an age, and maybe, just maybe, he was talking about ours. The lights will flicker, the towers will crack, the noise will die, and when it does, we will all ask the same question: what have we built? And who was it really for? There comes a night in Isaiah's vision where even the moon refuses to shine. No silver reflection, no gentle glow, just darkness thick and whole. He calls it a time without moonlight, not dimmed, not eclipsed, gone, as if heaven itself turned its face away from the world. What kind of night is this? Throughout history, the moon has been more than just a rock in the sky. It was a calendar, a compass, a symbol of rhythm and order. Farmers planted by it. Sailors trusted it. Prophets watched it. So when Isaiah speaks of a time when the moon is dark, the meaning is deeper than astronomy. Something has broken. A pattern has snapped. Some scholars call it poetic, symbolic, a metaphor for a culture that's lost its way. When nothing in the heavens makes sense anymore. When guidance is gone. When even the light we didn't earn, the reflected light, is taken back. But what if it's more? Isaiah isn't the only one who saw it. Revelation echoes the same darkness. The moon becomes blood, or disappears altogether. Joel speaks of it. So does Amos. It's as if they all glimpsed a night where the sky goes silent, where creation itself mourns, or warns. Ancient people were terrified of lunar eclipses, not because they didn't understand them, but because they did. They knew something had shifted, a veil lifted. For a moment, the moon became a reminder that nothing on earth was fixed forever, that empires could fall, kings could die, and light, any light, was never guaranteed. In our modern world, we've tamed the moon. We map it, land on it, joke about it. But Isaiah wasn't writing for the comfortable. He was writing for the shaking, the unraveling, the moment when all the nightlights fail and you are left with nothing but breath and questions. What if the time of no moon isn't just about the sky? What if it's a warning about the soul? Because there are moments, personal, cultural, global, when it feels like the moon has left. No peace, no clarity, no direction, just waiting, watching, wondering if the dawn will ever come. But in the darkest parts of Scripture, there is always a thread. The same Isaiah who spoke of a moonless night also spoke of a coming light, a child, a dawn, a glory that rises not from the sky, but from within. That kind of light cannot be eclipsed, cannot be shut off. So yes, the time of no moon may be real, symbolic and cosmic, a blackout of both heavens and hearts, but it is not the end of the story. It is the moment just before the first light returns. Isaiah does not whisper about the end. He roars it. The Lord comes with fire, he declares, and the words crackle like dry tinder. Not gentle warmth, not a flickering candle. This is consuming. This is purging. This is fire as judgment, not comfort. What does it mean for the Lord to arrive like that? We are used to soft images of divinity, shepherd, healer, guide. But Isaiah pulls no punches. He sees a God who is not only holy, but dangerous. A God who arrives not with flowers, but with flames. A whirlwind follows him. Fury rides beside him. And the fire? It is not random. It is righteous. It knows where to go. This fire is not the campfire of a storyteller. It is the furnace of reckoning, and it is deeply personal. Isaiah describes it not as a flood that wipes out everything indiscriminately, but as something that seeks, divides, and reveals. The fire tests what kind of material we are made of, straw or stone, ash or gold. It burns away lies. It exposes what was always hidden beneath the surface. We do not like this image. We prefer mercy to wrath. But Isaiah offers no apology, because in his world, like ours, there are things that must burn: injustice, cruelty, arrogance, the rituals of religion without the soul of it, the temple filled with prayers but empty of justice, those who devour the poor and cloak it in policy. That cannot stand in the presence of holy fire. But here's the mystery. Isaiah does not say the fire comes only to destroy. He says it comes to cleanse, to purify, to remake. Fire, in ancient times, was not just the weapon of wrath, it was the tool of transformation. Gold went through it to become pure. Sacrifices passed through it to become holy. Even cities devastated by flame could rise again, stronger than before. So when Isaiah says the Lord comes with fire, he's not just speaking doom, he's describing a process, a final, terrible, beautiful cleansing, a day when everything false melts away and only truth can survive the heat. Maybe that's why the fire comes last, because God waits. He warns, he calls, but eventually he arrives, not hidden, not silent, but with a fire no one can ignore. And in that moment, every pretense will crumble, every mask will fall, every hidden thing will be revealed by light hotter than the Sunday. And some will be refined, others consumed. The choice was never whether fire would come, only what we would become in it. Isaiah saw a day when the world would speak in many tongues, and yet somehow still hear the same message. He described it like a song rising from every corner of the earth, from coastlands and mountains, from deserts and distant islands. Voices once scattered now returned, not just physically, but spiritually. The exiles were not only a people ripped from their land, they were a people who had forgotten the sound of their own name. And yet Isaiah promised they would remember, even across borders, even across languages, even across centuries. But it wouldn't come easily. Isaiah saw the rise of global empires, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and through them, the shattering of tribes into fragments, the forced migrations, the assimilation into foreign lands and foreign ways. He saw how language became both a curse and a bridge, how the people once united under a single covenant would be forced to pray in tongues not their own, sing in accents that carried the taste of exile. And yet he called this scattering not the end, but the beginning of something stranger. He said there would come a time when messengers would speak in tongues unknown to Judah, and yet those words would carry truth, that the knowledge of the Lord would cover the earth as the waters cover the sea, that the scrolls would go out beyond Jerusalem, beyond even the faithful remnant. The vision widened. Globalism was not just a Babylonian or Persian invention, it became divine architecture. What the enemy meant for dispersion, God would use for diffusion. The exile became the means by which the word moved. Foreign tongues would carry sacred meanings. And in time, the message that began in one language would be echoed in 1,000 dialects: Aramaic, Greek, Latin, Coptic, Gothic, Mandarin, Arabic, Swahili, and English. Isaiah hinted that this wasn't accidental, because God does not fear foreignness. He uses it. He whispers through winds that cross oceans and settles in the hearts of those far from the temple, far from Zion, far from any place they thought holy. And then he draws them back, not always in geography, but in spirit. He returns exiles by transforming strangers into kin. The multitude of tongues no longer confuses, it harmonizes. And somewhere in that harmony, Isaiah saw a song no empire could silence. A melody carried across time and distance. A voice crying, not just in the wilderness, but in the cities, the villages, the airwaves and fiber optics of the modern world, a voice that still speaks, even now. He wasn't only writing for kings. He wasn't only warning nations. He wasn't only speaking to his own time, his own people, his own collapsing world. Isaiah knew somehow that his words would outlive empires, that what he saw wasn't just for the courts of Judah or the streets of Jerusalem. It was for someone far beyond. It was for you. There's a moment in his scroll where the prophet suddenly shifts tone, almost like a hand reaching across time. He speaks of a sealed book, a scroll that cannot be opened by the learned or the powerful. And yet, one day, someone would read it not with the eyes, but with the soul. That reader would not simply study the words. They would feel them, as if the ink were fresh, as if the voice were whispering through the page. Isaiah described visions that didn't make sense in his own century: global shaking, cities collapsing in confusion, stars falling, the sky itself ripped open like a curtain. He wrote about a servant rejected by all, yet carrying the weight of everyone else's grief. He described a time when the wolf would lie down with the lamb, and when death would be swallowed forever. None of that had happened yet, but he wrote it anyway. And now here you are, reading, listening, wondering, why does this ancient voice sound like it's talking about your world? Because maybe at Island, Isaiah saw things he couldn't explain, for people he would never meet. He wrote to the exile, to the skeptic, to the survivor. He wrote to the one who still believes after all the light has gone out, to the one who still dares to hope when nothing makes sense, to the one who looks at the sky and wonders if history is circling back to its beginning. He wrote for you. This book was not just a record. It was a seed, buried in time, waiting for the right season, the moment when the world would need it again, when warnings would become mirrors, when promises would become anchors, when the ancient would feel frighteningly current. So here is the scroll, unsealed, whispering, not to scholars, not to priests, to you. What you do with it, that was always the question. They had laughed at prophets once, brushed off the old scrolls as myth, as metaphor, as madness. But now the air is different. The silence before the storm isn't quiet, it hums. The ground groans. The skies hold their breath. Something ancient is waking, and the nations feel it. Isaiah saw it long ago. A moment when the proud would stammer, when the high towers would shake, and when the centers of power, those glittering capitals, would melt into fear. This wasn't just about kings and armies. It was about the soul of humanity trembling under the weight of consequences long delayed. He spoke of a day when God would rise not in whispers, not in dreams, but in fire and shaking and clarity that no one could escape. He wrote of the terror of the Lord, and that phrase wasn't poetic. It was visceral, a kind of dread that comes not from chaos, but from perfect justice. Every lie exposed, every cruelty remembered, every secret weighed. The mountains would move, the earth would tilt, the sun would hide, but the most terrifying thing wouldn't be what was seen, it would be what was understood. That everything was leading here, that the warnings had not been exaggerations, that grace had an expiration date, that the judge had finally stood. Isaiah didn't see a quiet ending. He didn't describe a gentle sunset. He saw upheaval. He saw the thrones of men toppled by a presence no military could stop. He saw alliances fracture and weapons burn. He saw the voices of arrogance go silent, replaced by a single cry, "Who can stand?" But this was not cruelty. It was correction. The shaking was mercy wearing fire, a last act of love from a God who refused to let darkness win unchallenged. The trembling of the nations wasn't just punishment. It was the doorway to something new, yet many would not pass through, because the shaking doesn't just destroy. It reveals. It shows who clings to the old world and who longs for the one to come. Isaiah didn't end with terror, but he passed through it. Because some things must fall for the better to rise. And so, Before the peace, before the light, before the world made new, the trembling, and now the ground is beginning to move. He did not know your name. He did not see your face, but he saw your time, your choices, your silence, your hunger for truth in a world drowning in noise. Isaiah did not write for the past. He wrote for the ones who would live at the edge of everything. He saw a world where knowledge would multiply but wisdom would wither, where people would have ears but not hear, eyes but not see. He saw a generation weighed down by options but starving for meaning. He saw a people numb from too much news, too many gods, too little stillness. And yet, he saw someone reading. He saw someone sifting through old words as if they were new, not out of curiosity but out of desperation, because something inside you already knew what the world tries to forget, that there is an ending, that this story, like all stories, arcs toward judgment or mercy, that you are not just floating through time, you are being called. Isaiah didn't offer soft comfort. He offered fire and wounds and promises carved into stone. He described a servant no one wanted but everyone needed, a kingdom without borders, a king with scars, a future that would cost everything but heal everything. You were never supposed to be a spectator. The scroll was always meant to fall open in your hands. The voice was meant to echo in your chest. Come out, wake up, choose. This is not ancient poetry. It is coded lightning for the last days, and you are living in the very hours he saw from across the centuries. The trembling, the shouting, the sifting, the collapse, the hope. Isaiah saw a world fall down. He saw the sky tear open. He saw a remnant rise. And in the middle of all of it, he saw you. The book is still open. What happens next is what you decide.